I do mean that, by the way, because I think some people thought it was a joke. Who's used Cyber-Dojo? Kind of knows what it is? Anyone never used it before? A couple of people. Okay. So it's a web app. You use it in the browser. That image is slightly out of date. And basically it allows you to get this. So I jokingly say it's the world's simplest non-development environment. And that there is some truth behind that because it's built for practice and not for development in the sense of finishing something. So it's a deliberate design decision that it is very short on features. If you use it, for example, there's no compile button. There's no code completion. For a while, there was no color syntax highlighting until someone did. Is Byron here? My friend Byron did quite a lot of work putting color syntax highlighting in. So it's the same for all language test frameworks. All you've got is a test button. And when you hit the test button, the files that you can see in the browser are sent to the server. The server is a Docker container application, microservices. Spins up a service called a runner. It sends the files to the runner, and then the runner spins up, come back here, the runner spins up a Docker container, the right Docker container for the language test framework that you've picked. It injects the files into that container, and it runs them, and as long as they finish within 10 seconds, the output comes back, and then that is regexed to give you the color of the traffic light, red or green, basically. Yeah. The only extra thing I forgot to mention is that you have maximum of 10 seconds. Again, that's a big difference between regular development and when you're practicing. When you hit the test button, it has to come back within 10 seconds. There's quite a lot of other things you can do with it as well. For example, if you click on any of the traffic lights, you get a diff showing you the actual step-by-step progression from one traffic light to the next, and you can revert back to any previous traffic light. It's also very strongly built with the idea of working as a team. So at the moment, if you look carefully, you can see that I'm the owl, because another feature that isn't there is login. There's no username, password, login. It's all anonymous, and again, I could talk about that for ages. But there could be 7 little groups, and there'll be 7 animals, and on the dashboard, we'd be able to see all of the traffic lights for all of the animals. And again, we could click on any of those traffic lights and see the diffs, and that's a very powerful way of doing a review. So that's it in a nutshell. If we go back here a sec, I'm not sure if you can read that at the back. Commercial use requires a license, but non-commercial use is free. And as it says, 100% of the license fees and donations goes towards helping children learn about software. It's done with a properly set up charity called the Cyber-Dojo Foundation that Seb Rose from Cucumber set up. Those are the 4 trustees. Kind of just historical that they're all white, male, middle-aged men. I kind of slightly apologize about that. And that's the technology under the hood. So it's a Rails app, but really it doesn't need to be, because there's very little I actually need in terms of the webby bit, the Rails bit. Like I said, most of it's microservices, and the runner and the actual individual images for the language test frameworks are actually doing the work through the magic of Docker. Now, given that I've just a moment ago talked about how deeply embedded testing is in this, I was going to say it's impossible to not test in this, but I can't actually say that because you'd be amazed how ingenious people are at not actually doing testing, even when the only button they've got is test. Yeah? But given I'm a big advocate of testing, I follow 100% coverage for everything I write when I'm working on Cyber-Dojo. And I'm fortunate to use Travis, which is a build system some of you might know. It's not as popular as things like other ones that are more popular. But I really value the service that I get from Travis as an online build system. Most of it's written in Ruby. And again, that's mostly just historical. Because it's a microservice architecture, it's quite easy for new services to be added that wouldn't be Ruby, and that's exactly what some of my friends from 60 North in Norway are doing, because they're building a REPL. If you think about a normal REPL, when you fire up a REPL, it's kind of blank and there's nothing in it. But with Cyber-Dojo, it should be quite easy, and Austin's been working on it and is very close, that the files that you've typed and that are available at this current moment in time, when you click the REPL button, those would automatically be inside your REPL environment, ready for you to interact with. Yeah, so there's quite a lot of powerful things we can do there. In terms of how the code is organized, it's on two organizations in GitHub. So the first organization is called Cyber-Dojo, and this is for the actual services themselves rather than the languages. Yeah, so there's about 15 different services there. They're all fairly small, and those are currently all written in Ruby. And then most of the repos are for the individual test frameworks. So as I said, there's a repo for each individual language test framework combination. Yeah. And again, all of those have build scripts that run on Travis to generate the Docker images that then get pushed to the Docker hub, ready for the next set of tests to run, because they trigger the next set of tests. So that's all I kind of had to say as an overview. I was kind of hoping we could have a more dynamic, interactive question and answer sessions from that. And I just have popped up a whole bunch of possible topics, which might be things you're interested in. But if you've got any other questions different to those, that's obviously fine. Any questions from anyone? Anything anyone would like to know? Yeah.
What are things you would like improved available on GitHub issues or somewhere? Because, of course, it's microservices, so it should, in theory, be very easy to improve.
Yeah, so the question was, are there any help that people could help me with, issues on GitHub? Yes, each of the GitHub repositories does have an issues list. Most of them don't have any entries in that issues list because most of them don't have issues in the sense of bugs. But some of them definitely do have issues that are marked as new features. Yeah, there's a couple that we're working on, as it mentions here. Some are in progress. Round tripping is interesting. That's in progress at the moment. But to answer your question, yes. If you look for a quite short amount of time, you'll find things that potentially could be useful ways of contributing, if you're so inclined. Question from back, yeah?
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned that the newer languages are more fragile, which was a comment on the languages rather than on the side of Dojo.
Yeah.
Do you ever take languages out?
So the question from Jez was two questions, really. First one was an observation that I said to him when we just discussed a moment ago the individual language test frameworks and how we build the Docker image for those. Again, that's all automated, and they typically have a base image which is either Alpine, Debian, or Ubuntu based. So there's a whole bunch of tests that happen for that, but fairly often the base image will be updated, and I don't base my Docker image on a specific version of a base. I always base it on the latest, yeah, because I think it's just the best way of doing it. So, do things break? Yes, they do break. And the younger the language, so the more likely they are to break. Just because the younger they are, the faster they're changing. And does that mean that some languages fall behind? It does, because if you think about the consequences of that, you can't build at the moment an image. It just doesn't work. But you always have the image from a week ago, and then it's 2 weeks ago, and then it's 3 weeks ago, and then it's 4 weeks ago. So it's kind of unusual to lose an actual language from Cyber-Dojo. It's just that it's becoming further and further in the past in terms of the version number, for example. Okay? Having said that, there is one language test framework that did get lost, and that was the approval style testing for Ruby. And the reason that got lost was because approval style testing is a bit different. In approval style testing, when you run the tests, a text file gets generated, which is compared against a golden master. And unless you can see the generated text file, you're not really going to have much of a useful interactive experience. And at the moment, Cyber-Dojo doesn't round trip. It doesn't bring the text files that are generated back to the browser. And that's what I was talking about here, the second one down, the round tripping. That's currently in progress at the moment. In fact, the text files are already coming back from the runners. It's just they're not coming back from the web service back to the browser. But that shouldn't take too long now. It's nearly there. And then we can reintroduce the approval style test frameworks. And of course, at that point, there's a whole other world of opportunities that arises because you could do things like you could add coverage. Yeah? If the scripts that you're running inside the container generate coverage information, that again could be something that comes back and potentially even could be used quite easily to control whether that's a red or green. Yeah, so you could run a little session where you have to have coverage of a minimum level, and if you drop below that level, it turns it into a red, for example. It becomes a failing test. Yeah. Okay, question there? Great.
A couple of people have mentioned it would have been easier to use an IDE instead of tools. Can you help me answer that question?
Yes, and it's kind of the part of what I said in the introduction at the beginning. It's about setting expectations, I guess. Yeah, you have to quite strongly say at the beginning, you know, that we're not actually developing something here. We're not shipping something. It's not necessarily about finishing it. And when I use this in training sessions, for example, I always do the same exercise at least twice. And I really do believe in that because in a practice environment, you're not doing something to finish it, you're doing something to learn. But I don't mean learn in the theoretical sense, I mean learn in the practical sense, like Jean-Paul Sartre said, okay? So if we've got an hour, we don't do the whole hour as one session. No. We do 20-minute session programming, and then we do a review for 10 minutes, and I get everyone to actually write down at least one thing. It might be something they did, it might be something that they saw another animal do, it doesn't matter. They can pick whatever they like for whatever reason, and then we literally start again from scratch. And the point is you're trying to put in the new thing that took your fancy for whatever reason. Now, that's easy to say, but even then, sometimes that doesn't click. You can see it, viscerally, you can see it. I see it all the time when I'm using this tool. Particularly when I was, just the most recent one that pops into my head was, I was doing some work, it doesn't matter where it was, who it was, I mean. And we did the same exercise 4 times, and only on the 4th time could I see people start to relax and realize that this wasn't a regular environment where the purpose of doing whatever you're doing was to finish what you're doing, yeah, so that you can ship it. Because that's the mentality you have that affects the way you work. If you're in the same IDE, if you use the same IDE when you're practicing, which is as the one that you use when you're developing, that will very strongly, in my experience, influence your mindset. So it's quite deliberate that when you use Cyber-Dojo, it does not look like an IDE. Okay, so if we, again, just take a little example of that. If we come back here, it's possible to have files in nested subdirectories on the left. You know, and if you're using a proper IDE, those would be properly nested in a standard widget that does the nesting in a directory structure, right? Yeah, doesn't do that here. They're all just full paths. It looks pretty crude, and again, relatively easy to put the widget in to make it appear like more like an IDE, but it's the conscious decision that we're not doing that, okay? So it reminds me a little bit of a quote from Winston Churchill. He said, if you're going through hell, keep going, right? Yeah? You have to keep going a little bit until it clicks, okay? But it does, that's a common question that I get. It does take a while before you actually see people, like I said, relaxing and actually realizing it's different. Okay, and then you get fun. That's when the fun starts. It's like chalk and cheese. Another question, yeah.
On the same topic of new features, is there a list somewhere of languages/testing frameworks which you would like to have, not just specific features in specific language and testing frameworks?
Sure. So the question was, is there a list of test frameworks that people have suggested? There is. That tends to get quite high priority, so it usually gets whittled down. And I think from memory, there's only 2 in there at the moment. Okay, but again, if you want to contribute, that would be a really great, easy way to do it. And I've set up a lot of the testing structure so that your experience will be enhanced. You'll be able to make something that works very easily because the Travis test pipeline, for example, does lots of the testing for you, kind of thing. 5 minutes left, okay. And the other thing, of course, is that there's new test frameworks popping up all the time. Yeah. Any other questions? No, in that case, I guess I'll just pick some of the ones from here. kind of talked a bit about that, talked a bit about that, talked a bit about that. Okay, 5 slowest tests are reported. As I said, I'm very keen on testing, and I get quite a lot of output. Perhaps I can show you that. Not there. If I... this text has got very small in front of me here. Where are we? We're in runner statelets. Okay, that's good, but probably better to be in web. So web is the main service. And if I start to run the tests there, what's happening now is it's building the image. The image contains the source code and the tests. It's then creating containers and extra containers that it needs. And then it's running all the tests because obviously it's creating a container, I should say, first. It's then shelling into the container, and it's running all the tests. It's using a little custom test framework that I built, so it's getting some output that is slightly unusual if you look at it. And it's doing it module by module. In terms of the directory structure, if you know Rails, there's app controllers, app views, app models, that kind of stuff, okay? So they're trundling through, and they get slower towards the end. So the ones at the app controller end are, as close as you can get to doing it without Selenium, basically, okay? And they're trundling through, and we'll look at the output that you get at the end in a minute. But what I've added quite recently, as you can see, there is the 5 slowest tests in each subdirectory. And something I hadn't anticipated that I found really useful is I find I get a lot of information from the knowledge of which ones are the slowest. I can't quite put it into words yet, but if we look at that one, for example. Yeah. So that one, the slowest test in that little subdirectory is by clear, it's an outlier. Everything is, less than 0.02 seconds, except one of them, which is 2.5 seconds. And that might sound a lot, but these things add up quite quickly. And once I think about this and I look at that 2.5 seconds, I realize I should be doing something slightly different. Some of the functionality that's in web should be pushed into a different microservice with its own test cycle time, et cetera, okay? And then these would all drop down. Most of the slowness coming from these tests would drop down. So I find that feedback of which are the slowest tests to be a really valuable thing in terms of helping me spot where the coupling is just getting a bit gnarly. And at the end, as I said, we get just a bit of output. Obviously, there can't be any failures, can't be any errors, can't be any skip tests. And a few other bits and bobs, and the 100% coverage. So if the coverage drops below 100%, that counts as a failure. You wouldn't, for example, then go into the next phase of the script, which creates the image, which potentially would then have to get to the Docker hub if you wanted to actually make that something that participates in the actual live product, yeah? Yeah. 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 Is that an aspirational statement? No, that's already been done. Right. And so what's that system test of Cyber-Dojo itself? That's the whole thing in Selenium. Right. So you're spinning up the whole thing. So after your test, you just show them. Yeah, that was a test for one service, the web service. And that's in the dependency chain. Obviously, that has to trigger other repos, and then they go through their Travis chain to make new containers and images. And if they also succeed, eventually, quite quickly, it gets to the system tests. And that basically does what you would do if you were deploying a new server. Okay? Well, it doesn't basically do it. It does do it. It makes a new server. And then it does Selenium stuff, pretends to press the buttons. And again, if all that passes, I know I've got a consistent set of images that I can use when I'm shipping the next release. Yeah, I just do a standard blue-green stuff every week. Yeah. You have a question yet?
Have you ever used it yourself to learn a new language, for example?
All the time. Yeah, I use it. The question was, have I used Cyber-Dojo myself to either learn a new language or, experiment with some little feature that I need inside Cyber-Dojo? Yes, the answer is I do that. Not a lot, but I do it some of the time. Yeah. And we're up. We're out of time. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.